So sometimes I kind of feel like, big picture wise, what do I really face to say, to call out anything? I don't know. How do you feel with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think even just in us being here today to talk about this, it isn't an easy thing to do. I think it's a fine line to be in the media industry, in the Canadian media industry, which, as we know, is a revolving door, and to want to talk forthcomingly about racism, because it's not an easy thing to talk about. And I really relate to what you said about just how that manifests in the day-to-day. And I think especially everything going on with George Floyd, with the Amy Cooper story, it's often young, racialized, precariously employed journalists who are, as you say, seeing that coming up on their timelines. It's the only thing they're thinking about. It's the only thing they're talking about. It is so front of mind. It is weighing on them. And then you walk into a room to pitch it. And sometimes I feel like talking about racism in the media is almost like, we're talking about a ghost. And sometimes it's a ghost in the room that only you can see, or only I can see, or only certain people can see, because you can see sometimes reactions to a story. And the thing is, in Canada especially, I'd say it's rarely overt. I can't say that I was ever called anything or anything like that, but you can just see how people react to certain stories that you bring up, especially when race is a huge factor. And so you get it. I think it manifests for me in the way that people respond to certain stories, the willingness to take certain things on, the interest, and I think sometimes very uphill battle to talk about things that have to do with race, especially in a place like Canada, where I think we tend to say, oh, it's not as bad as the US, or that happened over there, there's no relevance over here. So then you get put in this kind of almost impossible situation where you're trying to say, yes, that may have happened in the US, but there's resonance here. And so it becomes a hard thing to kind of quantify. Like, you can't put your finger on it, but you feel it. You feel it sometimes in where a story is placed in a show, the amount of questions you get on a story, and sometimes almost the possibility of pitching it. And
I also think, not to cut you off, but I also think you see it with the way stories are told, the way they're framed. A couple of days ago in Toronto, we had, a park, Trinity Bellwoods Park, where there was a ton of people in that park, in that environment. And I saw a lot of op-eds written about it. And it was framed in a way where these young people were kind of defended. And trust me, like, I have two small kids. I recognize my privilege. We just moved, and for the first time ever, we have a backyard. So I recognize that I have access to a green space if needed. But I also realized that the people who were talking about that didn't necessarily involve other people outside of that neighborhood, where if you went to a park in Scarborough, the behavior was very different. Or if you went to a community where there were more people of color, the behavior was also very different. We heard stories about, as you know, it was an important time of year for Muslims. We heard stories about, police showing up at people's homes and all that kind of stuff. And then you see this huge group of people in a park putting other people's lives at risk. And then you see people in the media defend that behavior. And I really wanted to see other voices included. And I think it's like, who's telling the stories, right? If you don't have people in newsrooms from different communities, I don't know if it's even possible to tell stories in a wider lens. And that's the thing that makes me feel kind of sad and kind of, by no ways, like, I recognize my privilege. I'm a visible face on camera, on TV. And, back in the day when I first started, when we talk about like have I experienced racism, the thing for me was how I looked. And I also know that because my skin is lighter, I have, light eyes. From a very young age, I understood that that got me into certain doors. Like from the time I was 17, my brothers had a hard time getting jobs working at fast food restaurants. I never did. I would walk in and would get the job. They would end up washing dishes in the back. So I recognize that so-called privilege. And I think that's a word that sets people off because I don't think anyone wants to think that they didn't earn something or they don't deserve something, whatever that means. But I think it's really important to look at who is in the newsrooms and who's telling the stories and what voices are missing. And I think that's like those little kind of cuts when you don't see yourself represented in the stories or when you see a story from your neighborhood told through one lens. I think that has huge implications.
Yeah. And I think for me, when I think of a place like Toronto, you could walk into any newsroom in the city, where I'm in Toronto right now. And when you look at the world that's outside of our newsrooms and what that world looks like, and you walk through any major Canadian newsroom, they're worlds apart. The inside of the newsroom does not look like the world outside of it. And that to me is, especially in the year 2020, in a city like Toronto, I think that is a real, that's so glaring to me. And then it filters into what stories get pitched, what stories get told, which stories get selected. And then at a higher level, I think sometimes there's a lot of patting on the back when you say we have diversity, the word diversity. And sometimes I feel like...
Can I just say that word? I don't like that word.
Yes. Let's talk. Okay, so let's talk.
I don't like that word.
And I also don't like that word. I feel like it is... the word, ideas like diversity and inclusion, it's almost like we are being invited into something that doesn't already belong to us or that we're somehow guests.
Mm-hmm.
And I also
tolerated, that you're being tolerated.
Yes.
And I'm sorry to interject, but there's been times where I felt like when I am doing a certain job, that some of the people that I work with believe that I'm there because I am a diversity hire. And I wonder if I do look and stand out the way that I do in the environments, because most of the times when I'm in certain rooms, I am one of very few people of color. But it's that always having to try to prove your credentials, that like those little microaggressions, like, I wonder why you're here, and it could be, honestly, I don't know. It could be in the past where I was invited. I know from Much Music, a producer had said that we were all characters, right? And that's how they described actual beings, living beings. And I remember when I did start at Much Music, there was a producer who said to me that I should change my name because no one remembered my name and it was too hard to say it. I also had emails from within the community, from within my family too, saying that you should straighten your hair. What is happening on your head? And so you have all these stuff coming, and you have to figure out what is it. It's like you're getting it from different places, and because you are one of the few in those environments, then you're expected to carry a community. And obviously we're very diverse. There's that word again. But you know what I mean? But we're very different. There's different cultures, right? African people, just on the continent alone, very different cultures, right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes there's a kind of feel-good measure where people think they look at us in a room and go, check, we have diversity. It's this thing to check off a list. But where I do like the word diversity, where I would like to talk more about, and I wish we thought about it more in media, is the diversity in diversity, right? So if I'm, in a lot of situations, often the only one in the room, the only racialized person in the room, and, one time I heard something like, Pacinthe stories and the contacts that you have, nobody has a Rolodex like yours. And I know it was said to me in this like complimentary way that I have story ideas and connections and communities that I love. Like I love to kind of see myself as a bridge between the world that I live in and the world of media. But I actually saw that as an indictment. Why am I? I didn't feel like I was special in any way. It's just that.
Why did you feel like that?
Well, because I was the only one in the room. So of course, but imagine there was more. I don't want to say more of me. I think that's very reductionist. But there's diversity to diversity, you know. And I just think of the, like, even if you just get an average group of people in a room, think of the diverse opinions and angles and stories and interests. But then sometimes there's, for the most part, again, we're often the only ones in the room. So think of how flat our diversity is. Think of what we're missing when we are the only ones. And as you say, Dan, like there's almost like this burden of like carrying communities on our backs, you know?
And the expectations. It's like you have the expectations from your community. You also have the expectations from your organization. And the thing that I struggle with a lot is this idea that because I'm a person of color, I can't be objective. If I'm to pitch something, it's because I'm pitching it because I'm advocating for it, because it's, I can't even count the amount of times that I've been called a radical, feminist, left-leaning, whatever, by people who I've never had conversations with. It's because they see what I look like and they just assume a whole bunch of things about me. And then if I raise a story, I can't be objective, but the guy next to me, because he looks a certain way, he's part of the dominant community, the dominant culture, that he can be objective, but I cannot. I don't have those skills. And that's really infuriating as a journalist, because we go to school, we learn these skills, we put in time, we put in years of education, and behind the door, like this whole idea, like something that I recently learned, and I wrote about a piece that I did on CERB, this idea of social capital, right? Journalism still, like the media, still seems to be one of those industries where you need to know somebody in order to get your foot in. And I feel like that shuts off so many people. So it's like you already work so hard to get there. And just by like sheer determination and luck, of course, but then you're still kind of like, well, you're not really, because you look a certain way, because you're a woman, because you're Black, because you're whatever. And that really frustrates me. And I think that's the thing that really hurts me, and the idea that, if you're empathetic, or if you see, like, all stories are about people, and if policy starts with people, and if you don't care about people, it doesn't, like, if you care about people, it doesn't mean that you can't see the bigger picture. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't mean that I'm not as objective as a journalist who is detached, yeah.
And I think this concept of objectivity is an important one in journalism, but I think sometimes it's misconstrued and I think unevenly labeled. And I think sometimes by our very being, we're just seen as unobjective or biased, whereas that's not applied to other people. And I think, I believe in objectivity of method, right? You call, both sides if there's a conversation about events, and I think we have to be objective in our methods. But I think sometimes this idea of objectivity is lorded over us, and no matter what we do, sometimes just by virtue of our existence in a room, we're perceived as unobjective. And for me, how that's translated, although the longer I stayed and the more work I did, the more comfortable I got, there was always a game in my head about, what are you pitching today? But what did you pitch yesterday? Is it too similar? Again, especially when it comes to issues of race, religion, social justice issues, or things like that, I would, you start to kind of really internalize how you're perceived. You start to internalize sometimes the silence in the room. You internalize the lack of interest in a story. And at the heart of it, we're journalists. We want to get our stories on the air. So when you start to learn that when you pitch these stories, and there's always, especially I know that on days like today, with everything going on with George Floyd, with Amy Cooper, I know there are young racialized journalists in newsrooms across the country, here and in the US, who are pitching that and getting blank stares, getting a lot of questions, getting, sometimes it's almost like harder to get stories like this through. And so overall, I think that you start to kind of almost self-censor because you want to get...
You want to be taken seriously, right? Like you self-edit because, because there seems to be like this unspoken hierarchy of what is deemed to be a serious journalism story. And I totally get that. And I've had to push myself to sometimes, like, there's been times when I felt like I let myself down by not pitching certain stories. And there's times when I, like, my voice, like, shaking. Like, I just, like, my face, I just feel like I'm sweating, but I'm like, I have to pitch this just because it's important and just because I'm in this space. And I don't take it lightly that I'm in this space. If I'm in this space, it is my obligation to try. But it is hard because, like, I remember a time when I would edit myself so much that I kind of started feeling like I was having like a panic attack. And I would have, there would be interviews that I was doing and I would be introduced to the guest and the guest would be like, "Oh, your name is Sam?" I'm like, "No." And then I would say, "Rhymes with Sam, jokey. Oh, your name is Nat." Like, it just like the little, like, I don't even care enough about who you are to even know your name. I did one interview a while ago, this famous writer, and his body language was, like, you pick up on all these things. Like, as an interviewer, you pick up, like, body language. What do I need to do to make this person comfortable? What can I say? Like, I can read body language really well. And so he sat down, but he literally sat down with his legs facing away from me, right? Because he had already determined that the way that I looked, because he didn't know who I was, that I wasn't worth getting to know, or that I wouldn't have read his stuff, or whatever was going on in his mind. But I only had like a few split seconds, because if I catch feelings in those moments, if I'm like, oh, he doesn't like me, he thinks that I'm whatever, that would destroy the whole interview. There's too many people behind the scenes who work really hard to make this happen for me to do that. So I have to work through all these little things that I'm getting from this person. And I got to keep my game face on. And I'm not joking. I think it was like the second question. This man, like, he literally shifted his body, like lifted himself up like this, and then turned and faced me. Because I guess he determined that I had proven myself to him. So it's those little things, like those little, like, microaggressions. I don't know if it's because I'm XYZ. I don't really care. But it's those things that you have to kind of work through, and you can't really explain to other people. Some people might be able to pick up on it, like other women might be able to pick up on it, but you are in a situation where you really have to, inside you're feeling something, but on the outside, you can't let it show.
And then so when that happens, where do you turn? How do you process that? Is there a place where you feel like you can verbalize that kind of thing? Do you take it on and internalize? Like, what's...
it's hard not to internalize it. I would like to say that I don't care, but of course you want people to like you. You want people to, be interested in what you have to say. Like, if I was to do an interview and I didn't know anything about the person, or I didn't show up prepared, like, of course, roast me. Don't give me your time, because I've already shown you that, I've taken away your time and shown that lack of respect. But if we've just met and we're establishing, like, but again, it's one of those things when you kind of navigate it by yourself, like, and this leads me to mentorship. I have a very good friend who lives in the States. She's originally from Mississauga, and she's been working at CNN Toronto for like 21 years now, straight out of university. And she has had mentors throughout her career. And mentoring is something, I guess, it's in the US. They have all these different Black organizations where they pull in young journalists and they mentor them, and they help them. Like, people are invested in your career. I've never really kind of felt that here. Like I've had like my current boss right now at TVO, Stacy is brilliant. There were times when I first started and I was like, maybe I should straighten my hair because like the hate that I was getting on YouTube, like people making fun of my hair, like I'm like, come on, like sometimes it's like racism can be so boring and tired. Like, come up with something new. Like, yeah, my hair is curly. It looks, yes, I look like a chia pet. Yeah, I look like Satchel Bob. Like, I've heard that a million times. But even as a grown up, seeing that kind of stuff, it does like, it's those little cuts, right? And she's been great. And she said to me, she's like, no, you are not changing your hair. You're you, and that's what we want. Like, and so I've had that support. But like having a mentor, someone who's like invested in my career, I've never had that. So it's like you knock on the doors yourself, you kick them down if you have to. And also too, like with Twitter, the other thing, like to circle back what we were talking about social media, having like DM groups, because we're part of a DM group, reaching out to people and saying, how can I navigate this? Even my girlfriend, I'm in their part of their DM group. Giving you ideas on how to like, if you're having an issue, this is how you can combat it, or this is how you can approach it. But I don't know, have you ever had like a mentor, someone who could like guide you, someone who was invested in your career, someone who was invested in you?
Yes. I didn't have it at first though, and I have to say, in my those 2 years where I was still a casual, what they call the casual in my time at CBC between 2009 and 2011, when I had work for a week and then a day and then nothing at all for a few weeks. There was a time, I remember it was January 2011, and it was right when the Egyptian revolution started. And I was a casual at the time, and I remember speaking up and saying, it was a story meeting, it was 4 a.m. No one even knew my name. I was this unnamed person who walked into a meeting because someone was sick that day. And I remember saying, it's January 25th, 2011. I knew I have family in Egypt. I knew something big was going to happen that day. And I remember even just the fact that I spoke up in the room, like people just kind of turned and they were like, who is this person? And I remember what I was told was, if you can find someone to interview, we'll do it. But anyway, fast forward, it was just a very precarious time for me. And in the thick of the Egyptian revolution, I remember I would go at the end of the week and look to see if I had work for the next week, look up on a schedule in the newsroom. You looked at that schedule and that decided your fate. You were either on it or you weren't. And there came a time where I just stopped getting work. And I remember there was one person in the newsroom, and I remember she was a racialized woman, older than me. I was an associate producer, she was a senior producer. And she went to the executive producer at the time and she said, I want you to keep your eye on Pacinthe. I see something in her. I want her in my newsroom. And lo and behold, suddenly I had work, but it's because I had literally a sponsor, a mentor who took an interest in me. And I know for a fact, if she had not intervened, I would have fallen off that schedule.
What did it feel like to have somebody speak up on your behalf?
I mean, I didn't even think I was worth speaking up for. And then seeing that she had taken an interest in me suddenly changed my perception of, and it wasn't overnight, and I know we've all kind of struggled with imposter syndrome or whatever. But when I think of this idea of mentorship and support, I think what also happens is that in media, there's sometimes and often a lack of people to lean on, especially when you start looking at the higher upper echelons. I remember recently in the fall, I had a very big career decision to make. And there was so much I was weighing, and I wanted nothing more than to go to a racialized woman in senior management or executive management to say, how did you weigh something like this? And I couldn't find one. There were other people I could speak to, and I'm very blessed to have had really good mentors, like really amazing Canadian media heavyweights in my corner. But there are some dynamics that I think we want to talk about between us. And there was no one that I could consult who would have been weighing those same dynamics as me to go to. And I just remember being like, this is the problem, is that we love this, I think, sometimes feel-good idea that there's more of us in media, but where are we? Where are we when it comes to leadership and decision-making? And it felt, I get discouraged when I look at, what's happening the higher up you go in media.
And I have to big you up because you actually were the one that you put my name forward to fill in for Anna Maria Tomonti on The Current. And when you reached out, when I got the call, I was like, I couldn't possibly do this. Like, I just never, because I'd never had that. And it kind of makes me think, and thank you. that was one of those things like, oh my gosh, I think I'm going to die while I do this. And then when I finished, I didn't want to get off the chair. I was like, what? We're done? What's happening? I want more. But it makes me think of, I think it was Issa Rae who said, we had this idea of like, and I mean, she's talking about the acting world, but I think it kind of applies to journalism and media where we're looking up, we're trying to get people to like, call us up or to, sponsor us or speak up for us. But I think what's more effective or even what we have to do is look to the people beside us. Like the media girlfriends. It's like the people who are invested in you and because I think if you wait for somebody to, pull you up or to speak for you, I don't know, like for me, I don't think that's ever going to happen. Like I've seen a lot of my friends who are guys who've had some pretty, big guns step in and say that person, even when we were at, we were at Much Music, I found in my experience, not to speak for anybody else, in my experience, I found that the guys had a lot of support from other people who would like say, they should do that interview, they should do that interview. Whereas for the women, it was like, oh, they're not sexy enough, or they don't know anything about music. So it's, then the misogyny creeps in. Even when I was doing sports, my co-host could exchange numbers. Like he could get like whoever's basketball number, but if I got that number, then, she's trying to do this, she's trying to do that. So it's like you have to be so mindful of what's happening around you. And for young journalists, if you don't have a support system, you can become easily discouraged. And whenever I meet young women who want to get into journalism and they're like, well, I don't know, I'm like, please do. Because if you don't, then who's going to tell those stories when we're gone? Who's going to come up in those spaces? But it is really discouraging because it's like you have to fight and claw your way up. And, I don't know, like for you, why did you want to work in this space? Like, why did you want to be a journalist?
Oh man, I mean, I just feel like, it's so almost universal, but I just feel like our stories were often told about us and not by us in a lot of ways. And I could always see, in community, just like, why does, the media, quote unquote, big T, big M, why does the media do this and why does the media do that? And I was like, maybe, we all think that we can kind of change it or, make it more representative. But there was something you said about kind of like mentorship and support. And I think you and I are so lucky because we are literally surrounded by an army of supporters and mentors and people that we can vent to. But sometimes I also, especially on days like this, think of the toll of it. Like, I think there's so much when there's so few of us in media. I know that there's so much behind the scenes, venting, supporting, strategizing, talking, that's in addition to the actual work of journalism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Sometimes I feel like we almost have two jobs. It's like there's the job, and then there's the job of keeping each other going. And because there's so few of us, we lean on each other so much. And I think there's also a toll on that. You know what I mean? There's a toll of that. And I just think that that's something, it's almost like this hidden thing that you could never kind of bring up in a meeting but I just think that that's like an added layer of being one of the very few.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't know if you saw this report last year, Vice did a story about how right-wing groups were collecting the names of like racialized journalists. And I remember reading that and it consumed me for weeks. But I know people around me didn't see it or didn't feel like the, sorry, my kids are fighting over PlayStation. Juggle. They don't care about what I'm doing. I swear kids are humble you. But anyway, but yeah, that was on my mind for a very long time, and I'm very aware of spaces that I'm in. I even on when I'm on the train, I'm very aware of who's around me because uh, it's a very it's a very it's a scary time, and I think if you're a person who's front facing in media, that for me, even when I'm online, I share parts of my life because I don't want to hide my life. And I also know that I have a lot of people who are lifting me up, like you said. I have a lot of people who carry me. Um, but I don't know if other people, like my colleagues would think about that. Like, am I on the list? Am I not on the list? And sometimes, I feel like I wish it wasn't a solitary thing. Like, Cameron Bailey had this quote this morning. He tweeted something about, with everything happening, we still have to work today. But you have this pressure, like you have this, I'm worried about my husband, I'm worried about my son, I'm worried, but, I'm thinking about this family who lost their loved one. And then you see this stuff on social media trying to justify how he got hurt. Um, um, and then you see what's happening in the US and the election is coming up. And it's really hard to disconnect from what we do, especially when you know that you have to, again, it goes back to the objectivity, right? That you can't be objective towards this individual because you are a person of color, right? And it's this, like, so you have to kind of like, it's like a pull, right? Like do I step away from social media where my community is, but where all this stuff is happening that other people might not be able to understand, and how much, and where do I find, I don't know, like, it's,
So how do you, like, I what I'm hearing is kind of like there's almost like you've got real world concerns and worries and fears based on what's happening in the news. You come to work where you work in news. So how do you kind of sometimes carry those two things at once? Because I think sometimes all these stories are discussed as like things that happen over there that are American. It's a news story, but to us it may have very different resonance. How do you kind of like balance those things? What are some of the things?
So for the show that I do the summer show, and I love doing it, and I get excited, and I love working with the different producers from the show. But there's also a bit of trepidation for me because for those 2 months, I'm the face of the show. So that means that eyes turn on me where, I've had people say, oh, now that Steve is not on the show, I'm not even going to watch the show for the rest of the summer. Instead of actually just watching it and saying, okay, she did a good job, she didn't do a really good job, or it's just like you're just completely cut off because they're not interested in even they're not even going to give you a chance because you're not anybody they know or for whatever reason, right? And, I had an opportunity to interview
Nam is multitasking because she's super woman and has kids and is talking about media and
I just gave him this stink eye. It didn't work. But no, what I was going to say is that I had a big interview last year where it was something that I prepared for a long time, but it was at the beginning of the year. And hold on a second.
So, Pacinthe?
yes,
Yes. So we had a couple of questions. I think we had one question from Vicky Mochama. Vicky's question is, how do you fight for your ideas without burning bridges in the media?
I love how Nam disappeared on that question. That's a big question. I think it's a few things. One is persistence. And sometimes I think like just having faith in the fact that your ideas are worthy, even if they're not taken up right away. And I also think, to be honest, and this is where it's so important to have people that have been in media and have secure jobs, stability, and basically the safety of being able to push back. So I think, this concept of burning bridges is very real because, again, Canadian media is such a revolving door. You can say something to someone and then never get work again. So I think it's a few things. I think it's persistence and belief in the fact that your ideas are valid and important. I also think there's a systemic thing where you need to know that you have job security, job safety, support among colleagues to be able to bring those ideas forward. And I also think it's sometimes you have to leave an idea and come back to it. I used to get really, really discouraged when I would pitch something and it would be passed over. But I learned from colleagues that if you really care about something, you bring it back, you try new angles. And, I kind of loved bringing stories up enough times where they'd be like, okay, we're going to do it.
I'm back.
I'll pose the question. I'll just pose the question to Nam again, and then after that, if you could wrap up the session. One thing that I just wanted to add was, I know you talked about mentorship. Is there? Can you suggest other recommendations to address the racial bias and racism in media? I know you talked about mentorship, but could you add another piece? So I'll leave it to Pacinthe. Your skills as a journalist is already showing.
So are you talking, should I respond to the mentorship question?
Yes, if you could respond to the mentorship question, and Nam as well, and maybe get Nam to also respond to the fighting for ideas without burning bridges.
Yes. So I'll take the mentorship question. Honestly, I have tried, and I really hope, and I apologize to anybody who may be watching this, that I did not fulfill this promise to, but I really have tried over the years, over 10 years, that anybody who has ever reached out to me, I will make the time for you, whether it's a phone call or a coffee. When I was still at CDC, sometimes I'd invite young journalists, up-and-coming journalists, to come sit in on a story meeting or something like that, just to show them around. But I'm very findable on social media. It's just my first name, Pacinthe, on Twitter, on Instagram, and I really, really try as hard as I can to make those personal connections, because it's those personal connections that pay off. Somebody did that for me. People have been doing that for me, and it has paid off. And so I try to pay that forward as much as possible. So this is basically an open invitation for people to message me if they want to talk about things. And there's also, groups of us that kind of do group collective mentorship. So just get in touch with me and or Nam, and we will try to set you up. And Nam, the question that Vicky had put to us is, how do you kind of put forward your ideas and stick to them without burning bridges? I hope I got the question right, Kojo.
Happy belated birthday, Vicky. Thanks, Pacinthe. And I will say, Pacinthe, that you are one of those people that's really super accessible. So how do I put ideas forward without burning bridges? I think when I was in my 20s, I burned a few bridges because I was very, steadfast, and I thought that things should be a certain way. But as I got older, I realized that, in order for you to advance conversations, you also have to be able to listen, and not just to listen, but you also have to be able to hear. I used to be really uncomfortable having conversations where I was like, this is wrong. But I've learned how to, if something means a lot to me, I just keep trying. Like I said before, I've been in a position where I was nervous about pitching certain stories because I knew that maybe one or two people might be like, oh, there she goes again with her radical feminist, whatever. But I still said it, even though my voice shook. Did I pursue it afterwards? No. Sometimes I haven't, but sometimes I have, depending on how important I felt the story was. And if the story was denied for one platform, then I would, go to a publication, try a different way to get that story out. And that's worked for me in the past. But I also feel like you are one person. I don't think there's anything wrong with self-preservation. Like Pacinthe, what you said, this industry is so small. You have so many expectations from different communities, the people you work for, your own expectations for yourself. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, you know what, I'm not going to pick up this fight today. I'll pick up that fight tomorrow, next week, next month. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We lack support in this industry to begin with. And the industry is shrinking. And, you know, some people are braver than I am. And, you know, and that's that they make the decisions for themselves. But if I really believe a story should be told, I'll try. And if it's denied on one platform, then I'll try another way. Yeah. As far as mentorship, I really think that that's something that's missing, that whole social capital. Journalism shouldn't be based on who you know. I mean, that just, like, so if you don't live in a certain city, like before this COVID happened, when we would have different events, people who live, say, out west, I wish, you know, people live stream this so I could be a part of it, you know, because if you're not in Toronto, then you miss out. I feel like there's so many talented voices that we haven't heard, so many people who are not in this industry because they didn't know the right person. I think that's a structural thing. But I also think social media is really changing that. I think it's empowering people, as maddening as it can be sometimes, as distressing as social media can be sometimes. I think it is that networking tool that just kind of opens doors that might have been closed before. And like me, like Pacinthe, when people reach out to me, I try, hey guys, mommy's trying to have a conversation. Thank you so much. When people reach out to me online, I do try, and I've tried to meet people for coffee and stuff because I know what it felt like when you didn't know anybody and you were trying to just like, please listen to my demo, whatever, right? You're just trying to be seen, just trying to get that opportunity. And when you do get that opportunity, grab it. Just like, don't, you know, like the way that I left mine drop, grab those opportunities. And, you know, we need more. Just reach out to people on social media, and some people might respond, and some people might not. That doesn't mean that, you know, you're not worthy. That doesn't mean that you don't belong in those spaces.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much. We had to work through some technical difficulties at the beginning there.
And some parenting difficulties, but
hey, it is what it is. But you know, the great thing about having journalists in a session like this is you take over, and we appreciate you and we appreciate your work. So we have about 3 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say some thank yous, and then I'll leave it to Pacinthe and Nam for final words. So as many of you may or may not know, Councillor Narinder Nan was supposed to be the moderator for today. But she couldn't join us, so she sent us a message, and I'm just going to read it for everyone. She said, "Dear attendees, I was so looking forward to having this discussion about media, racism, and receiving the responsible information with tonight's panelists. I am unfortunately in a city council meeting, and we did not anticipate this until last night. And so she's wishing us the best, and we'll try and see if we can bring her back on at some point in time. And before I leave it to Nam and Pacinthe, I just wanted to say a big thank you to our sponsors, the Canadian Heritage, for providing funding for this conference, OCASI, Rabble Media, the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council, YWCA Hamilton, and the Sexual Assault Center, Hamilton and area. And big shout outs to Sarah Jama, who couldn't make it today, and to all the HCCI staff that have been supporting the Anti-Racism Conference so far. So the last word goes to Pacinthe and Nam.
Well, thank you for having us. I think what I'll leave with is, you know, this work, this industry as it is so grueling, is so challenging, feels so uphill, even just regularly. And I think, Nam, you brought up a good point earlier about like trying to take it all on like the journalism, the community work, the mentorship. Like sometimes it can feel like a lot. And I think one thing that I can say is like, you can't take it all on alone. Seek help, seek mentorship. We are all trying our best to kind of be as available to, up and coming journalists as people were to us. But if you're ever feeling a bit overwhelmed, just know that it's not you. Like, it is truly just the industry itself, especially a shrinking, more challenging, more precarious industry. This is not easy. So give yourself a break where you can. Some days you will have stellar days. You will have days where you knock it out of the park. And there are going to be days where you feel like you've let yourself down. But there will always be another day. Just keep it going. Stay true to your compass. And just know that just give yourself a break where you can.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add on to what you said, Pacinthe. I co-sign everything that you said. And also to remind yourself, when you are having those hard days, remind yourself why you wanted to do this in the first place. And also reassure yourself that you do belong in spaces. It can be very intimidating walking into a space and you're the only person that looks like you. But think back and say, wow, I'm here. All the things that you did to get to that point, and you're there. So you have to keep pushing forward because your voice is important. Your voice matters. And if you do decide that at one point, this is enough for me, then leave on your own terms. But don't leave on what other people are doing to you or how they're treating you. If you decide one day, I can't handle this, I'm going to go become a coder because, pay is consistent and I don't have to deal with X, Y, Z, then do that. But do it on your own terms. And remember that you do belong in those spaces. No matter what anybody else says, you do belong in those spaces. Your ideas matter. Your ideas count. And I'm sorry to sound like an after-school special, but it's true. And if no one else says it, I'll say it. We'll say it. And that, you're not alone. You might not see other people, but like we're all there in spirit, and we're all standing on each other's shoulders. So bravo for getting there. Bravo.
Yes. And the last thing I'll say to any senior leadership in Canadian newsrooms watching this right now, hire more people of color, give them stable jobs, and also I want to see them in leadership. This will not change unless there's more of us in leadership in Canadian newsrooms. On-air representation is important, but also behind the scenes in leadership, in management, in executive positions. We need
up, yes. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Pacinthe.
So thank you, Pacinthe. Thank you, Nam. Thank you to Annette and Vanessa. Annette and Vanessa have joined us through our sessions. Thank you very much. And we wish you well in your continued work in the media industry. And for folks that have been tuning in, we will be back June 2nd, same time, 6 to 7. And hopefully by then we'll make sure we have all the technical difficulties sorted out. So thank you very much for tuning in. Good night. And please, as always, continue to stand up for justice, peace, and solidarity. Good night to you all.
Thank you.